Today's show focuses on a coalition of organizations and individuals working for full political, social, and economic equality for all women across North Carolina. The organization is NC Women United, and with us again are Tara Romano, President, and Emma Akpan, Director of Policy for NC Women United. Now, before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the major issues that were a part of your 2013 legislative agenda. I know that reproductive health was a major issue for lawmakers this past legislative session. Talk a little bit about that, Emma, and what your organization was advocating for.
Well, they took a lot of reproductive rights away in this long session. Last summer, in the month of July, they passed a bill about Sharia law, but they also attached this other religious liberty law that says that an employer can block contraceptive coverage if they wanted to, if they choose to. And then about a week later, they changed a few of the safety regulations in a lot of the clinics around the state. For example, little arbitrary things like the length of hospital doors and whether or not you have an awning. And so it effectively closed a lot of the clinics in North Carolina, and women who lived in more rural areas won't have access to their healthcare clinics. So it's really damaging to the reproductive rights of women, and we advocate for the fullness of health for women.
Okay. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't realize that changing those regulations on the doors and the awning would close a lot of clinics across the state.
Yes, because they made a lot of surgical regulations, but clinics don't have to be surgical. They're clinics, and a lot of the things that a surgical center needs, a clinic doesn't have to have. But when that bill passed, that effectively closed a lot of those clinics.
Okay. So what is the next step? Because I know that quality health care needs to be accessible to women all over the state, rural and in urban areas. So what is the next step with that particular issue?
Well, that's why we have this report card, so women are aware of the issues and making sure they know that their rights are not being protected. So they show up to the polls and speak their voice, they show up to these agenda assemblies, and they say what they want. And we want to create a state where women are active in the legislature and active in getting their issues across.
Let's talk a little bit more about the report card itself, because that's kind of a grading scale for the legislative session, correct?
Yes.
How did lawmakers fare in 2013 in that session?
We're still putting the report card together, getting the exact language, but unfortunately, a lot of things that were on our agenda didn't do so well. Now we did have some successes, and one of the things, talking about what Emma was talking about, they, initially when they passed the laws about the regulations for the clinics that provide abortions, they were going to put these standards out there, and NC Women United and our member organizations and partners did manage to gather a lot of women to come to these hearings and to make our voices heard. And so they did back off that a little bit, in that they are now, but they've given the power to the Secretary of the DHHS to set the new standards, whatever those standards may be. So now one of the things that we are trying to get women to do is to make sure that when they set those standards, they consider women's health and not make these things based on arbitrary political ideologies. And so, that's part of, like, when we have the report card, we just want, that was one of the things that we were able to do. But there were a lot of things that we feel, it just shows that there's more work that needs to be done. That's what we feel like. Yeah.
But what are some of those areas? I'm sorry, go ahead.
It wasn't all bad.
Not all doom and gloom.
It sounds pretty bleak, but there were a couple of things that were good for women, especially in issues around domestic violence. It's now easier to get a protective order against your partner. Before, they would have to sign a paper that basically says they committed an act of violence against them. But now, if they both agree to get this protective order, they can have it without having to go to court and battle it out. And
but both parties have to agree.
Both parties have to agree. Okay. But the party, the abusing party, doesn't have to agree to say that he or she committed the violence. Okay. So that makes it easier to get a protective order. And another thing is, before it was a misdemeanor for somebody to enter your home with intent to cause harm, now it's a felony.
That's major.
Yes, yes.
That
So
is major.
So I think those are two victories, and those are two hopes that we have for the health and well-being of women in our state.
So we're now in 2014 and looking at the short session, which we know lawmakers focus primarily on the budget. But are there any issues or any concerns that lawmakers should address in the short session, or that they even can address in the short session?
Well, excuse me, with the budget, I mean, we try to tell women, like, budgets aren't just numbers on paper, they are priorities. So when they are talking about what they're going to fully fund and what they are going to cut, they're really talking about what they think is important.
Absolutely.
We think that full funding of public education is very important. So we're also going to be looking at programs that provide a lot of safety nets for, women in North Carolina. About 40% of women in North Carolina who are raising families, they are the primary breadwinner. So the idea that they always have somebody else to depend on bringing the primary amount of money into the home isn't necessarily true. And we want to make sure, single women raising children are the most likely to live in poverty in North Carolina. So we want to make sure that there are safety nets to help these women. They are trying to raise their kids, and we want to make sure that, we feel like we have an obligation as a state to make sure that they can do that. So that's one of the things. We're going to be looking to make sure there's full funding of public education, looking at funding for a lot of, like, the Head Start programs or the programs that are help these women who are raising their kids by themselves.
Okay. Are there any other concerns that are maybe budget items as well that lawmakers need to pay attention to in the short session?
Well, this isn't necessarily a budget item, but it does have to do with, like, how they want to, cutting taxes and then not raising the revenue that they need, which wound up forcing them to cut some programs. But one of the things is the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, is being allowed to sunset. So this 2013 is the last year that families can claim that. And that was a really good tool for lifting particularly women with families out of poverty. So we do feel like we would probably want to talk to them about, could they please consider extending that again?
And again, how can people find out more information about NC Women United?
You can go to our website. It's ncwu.org, or you can call us at 866-518-7657.
Okay, we're going to take another break. We'll continue our conversation in just a minute. Up next, how you can get involved in the legislative process. We'll explain when Tarheel Talk continues.